Connect. Here we are. Okay, we're all here. So I'm now going to go back to the share screen. Here we go. And we're reading in English until we get to Hebrew. So Jack, would you like to give some background to the Smicha Renewal Project in Tzfat in 1538? Line 4, the expulsion from Spain.
The expulsion from Spain and the forced baptism in Portugal were the terrible climax of over 100 years of persecution and foreign apostasy.
And feigned. To feign is to pretend. Apostasy is to change your religion, the Moranos, in
the Iberian Peninsula. But
in the Iberian Peninsula, correct, which is Spain and Portugal. Now, we talked about the persecutions of 1391, 100 years and 1 year before 1492. The Rivash fled to Algiers, as did the Tashbets from Majorca, and it was going on before that. Things were never easy, except in the Golden Age, which was the 11th century. But the expulsion itself, if you can read on, please, Jack, from line 6. But the expulsion
itself was overwhelming in its awfulness and in an attempt to come to grips with its theological terms. Many Jews who eventually found a safe haven took comfort in the Jewish tradition that a period of escape, great suffering, is preliminary to the event of the Messiah.
In other words, Mashiach will come after great suffering. Now, there have been these seminal suffering events right through Jewish history. The Jewish people were always persecuted. Persecution was part of being in Galut and part of the role of the fate of Jews right through our history. But there have been some seminal sufferings which have been particularly traumatic. Churban Habayit, the first and the second, the persecutions in the First Crusade, the exile from Spain, absolutely the epitome, the zenith of all the persecution was to drive all the Jews out. The first forced baptism in Portugal, it was a cataclysmic event, and these make a mark. These make a mark. So the persecution, day by day, month by month, year by year, was something that Jews got used to. But these cataclysms were too much. And of course, we go through to Khmelnytsky in the 17th century and the Shoah. So the theology was always, there was a theological strand that said, the Mashiach is about to come, and therefore we've got to suffer particularly badly. Now, this period is known, so can I have you read the rest of this paragraph, please, Jack, line 9. Slowly, the period is known.
Esther Chemele Mashiach.
You're not Jack. Jack, do you have line 9?
Yeah.
This period?
This period is known as the Chevre Mashiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah, in the same way that the birth pangs precede the birth of a healthy baby. The coming of the Messiah has to be prepared in a period of intense and sui generis suffering for the Jewish people.
So I'm not going to go into the theology now. It would take us many hours. But there is this idea in the Jewish tradition that Chevle. Now, Chevle Leida. Chevel means a tough time, but we use it in terms of birth. Birth is, we got birth pangs here, the birth pangs of Messiah. Birth is traumatic, but the result is a healthy baby. So that image served Jewish theologians in many different types of Jewish literature as a precursor, something that comes just before the Mashiach, so that Jews who survive look forward to something better coming out. Now, you might, of course, say, I'd rather not have the Mashiach and not have the suffering. But since the suffering is beyond our control, we might as well have Mashiach as well. Okay, so at least there's something to give this horrible cloud something like a silver lining. So this is part of our tradition. This is the part in which way in which we've responded to these climactic sufferings right through our history. So what happened after the exile from Spain, after that event, like the Crusades, like Khmelnytsky, like Khurban, and like the Shoah, in order? Yonat, would you please read from line 12, in order to be deserving?
Line 12. In order to be deserving Mashiach, however, Israel must be deserving of this coming.
Of his coming. In other words, it works. Mashiach will come after we've suffered. We must deserve the coming of the Mashiach. Suffering is apparently not enough.
So that's why the Mashiach doesn't come, right?
That, Ian, if you say that, then perhaps you know more than the rest of us. But there is certainly an idea that we need to be deserving before Mashiach comes.
The consciousness of a large proportion of the Iberian refugees, not only the Marranos, were troubled by the serious sins they had committed as a result of the dire circumstances they encountered in their flight from the Iberian persecution.
Okay, now we have many Jews, some of whom never changed their faith, even under coercion, some of whom did accept baptism, some of whom lived as Marranos. We remember the story of the Mendes family. Now their consciences are very, very dark. They have had to commit sins. We know, they knew. What are we going to do about that? Can we somehow get rid of the sins so that the Mashiach can come? We've had the suffering, but we need to have merit. We need to deserve. We need to deserve Mashiach. How can we get ourselves back into God's good books after we, because of the need to survive, all committed serious sins? Now, the next one I can see, Ian and Taylor, is you. Thank you, Yonat. Of particular concern, line 15.
Of particular concern were those sins, the divine penalty for which is karet. This punishment, which is often translated as excision, is understood in several different ways. In the Talmud, karet is understood as a premature death, moed katan. Rashi connects it with childlessness, fritot and Shabbat.
Kretot, we'll pronounce it correctly. Kretot.
And Maimonides writes that it is non-admission to the life of the hereafter in Hilchot Shuvah. All three views are rooted in the Talmud and Midrashic traditions, but however one chooses to understand karet, it is a particularly ominous punishment, since it is solely in God's hands. And unlike human court-administered penalties, there does not at first sight seem to be any indication of how to do penance such that karet may be avoided.
So we have a whole system of punishments which would relieve one of liability. But how do you get rid of karet? It's administered by God, and we don't know the way God works in this as in many other aspects. Hopefully, what I've written is enough about karet, but if somebody wants to ask something or add something, certainly there is no problem. The question of childlessness is because there is a phrase in the Tanakh, karet va'ariri. Ariri means to go childless. Avraham says, va'anochi ariri uben meshek beiti hu yirash oti. And the Gemara discusses this issue of childlessness. There's also premature death, dying before your time. But do we know what before your time is? Well, some say 50, some say 60, some say we just don't know, okay? If you die of something and there's no other cause for it, the Gemara tells us about a rabbi who made a chorus party because he survived till the age of 60 plus. But all of this is kind of up in the air. but I've given you the main ingredients of karet. So it's a serious affair. And the first Mishnah in Masechet Kretot, David Parks, would you like to read from line 23? The first
Mishnah in Masechet Kretot lists 36 sins which one is liable to do karet, including, it's jumped up, including
breaking, line 24.
Right, including breaking Shabbat, eating chametz on Pesach, not fasting on Yom Kippur, adultery, including apostasy.
As changing your religion. Did you agree to become a Christian or a Muslim? Having relations.
And having relations with a nidar. And
having relations with a nidar is certainly a damping phenomenon in relation to unmarried couples on, say, on the west side, upper west side of New York, who feel that they want to indulge in sex, but because they've been brought up in a religious way, they're never going to have intercourse because of the karet. And to send your girlfriend to a mikveh is not kind of that easy to do, because the mikveh lady inspects all the women who come to the mikveh, and an unmarried woman might find herself under some type of inquisition. But this is a serious issue, as I said, for anybody contemplating that type of sexual relation outside of marriage. I'm not talking about inside of marriage, because it's usually possible to organize that fairly well. But when you don't have the possibility of a Jewish marriage at all, as in Spain, so we have couples who've been living together without chuppah and kiddushin, and there's no mikveh available. And if you start going to the sea or into a river and the Inquisition spies are after you, that's going to be a sure giveaway. So, and the next one is also very clear.
And neglecting to circumcise.
Now, if you circumcise, then of course, the Nazis did exactly that. Somebody they thought was Jewish who said they were not, drop your pants. So that's also something. So here we have Jews, some of whom had really a high degree of rabbinic pedigree, having to break the basic mitzvot, all of which.
May I just ask something?
Correct. Yes, sure.
We say above that Kores is, particularly because it's in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands, it's Misa B'dei Shemaim effectively. But breaking Shabbos is not. I mean, Slofchod was killed by Bestin effectively, because he was on Shabbos.
He was indeed, because there was Hatra'ah and witnesses. Say there's no Hatra'ah and there is no witnesses, you still would get karet for breaking Shabbat. Look at the first Mishnah in Kretot. There is indeed onesh bidei adam. We have an onesh, punishment meted out by the court, but that punishment which is meted out by the court, has to have two witnesses, has to have a warning, has to have a acceptance of the warning. Very difficult to make it stick. All of these are, as you can see, are basic to Judaism, to normative Judaism. Shabbat, chametz on Pesach, So, and the issue of idolatry. If you can catch an idolater, you'll certainly put them to death when the Beit Din had the power to mete out the death penalty. But say you don't. There's no mita bidei adam, but know that for idolatry, including apostasy, karet is like a sword of Damocles hanging over your head. And we don't have the other arayot in the list in the Mishnah, only the nidar, because that's something that's part and parcel of our constant living and part and parcel of what is important in the Jewish sex laws that we refrain and restrain. So hopefully that is a sufficient answer, Shmuley. But that basically is what underlies the Mishnah, and that's also the explanation of the conundrum and the very difficult situation in which the Iberian Jews found themselves. So imagine the whole of Gateshead Yeshiva, okay, has to go underground. The Inquisition is there, and there's no possibility of avoiding eating chametz on Pesach, because once you have matzah, they'll discover you. No mikveh, okay? There's no possibility of keeping Shabbat, otherwise you will be exposed. You have to go to the market and you have to buy pork, okay, in order to try and stay alive. Never mind undergoing a baptismal ritual, whether it's by coercion or not. I should imagine that the consciences of the yeshiva, its rebbes and the talmidim, would not be easy. So I'm just sort of giving you again an extreme example, just to try and bring us all into what is going on here. Because we often say, they tried to reintroduce Smicha in Tzfat and it didn't work. But when you read the actual tshuvot, which we're going to do, well, no, 150 pages of the Kuntra Smicha is not what we're going to read. But when we cherry pick and we take bits and pieces, we'll see that this was really on their mind. Wasn't they wanted to bring about Jewish unity and they wanted to remove all the machlokot? I mean, that may have been there too. But the main thing that's stated in the Responsa literature, the first thing is, how do we avoid karet? Okay? So with this, let's...
may I just intercede? I was very pleased to use the word penance in connection with this, because all these people are coming from Christianity, Spanish Christianity of all things, where penances were an enormous big deal in the Christian world then.
I was going to say that. I was going to come
sorry
to
to
that,
anticipate.
and you stole my thunder, but that's
sorry.
fine.
I apologize.
No, but that is absolutely spot on. You have a group of Jews coming from Catholic Spain, and Catholics, as you know, are deeply into suffering. You've got to suffer. And if you don't suffer, you'll never be able to get rid of your sins. And so we want suffering. It's not sufficient even to say, well, as Shmuley said, because it's in God's hand, perhaps God will forgive you then, because he'll understand that it was impossible to do anything else. Very difficult. No, that may be so, but I've got to suffer as well. Without suffering, I can never clear my conscience. Okay? But the normative point is that the Mishnah tells us that these are the things for which you get karet. And now we have a whole community, and some of the cream of rabbinic population in Spain and Portugal are all serious sinners. They're all chayev chorus. Not an easy thing to live with. Okay, so let's see. David Park, can you finish off, please, from line 20?
During their years of persecution and searching for a safe haven, many Iberian refugees had little option but to commit some or even all of these transgressions. And now in the relative security of the Ottoman Empire, their consciences gave them no rest.
And we'll take both the chorus issue and what Ranon's said about the need to suffer to clear your blackboard or whiteboard of all the sins. What are we going to do? The answer, Robert Vassell, you're going to give us now. Fortunately, in this context, line 30.
Fortunately, in this context, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can all hear you loud and clear.
Oh, good. Fortunately, in this context, Rabbi Akiva developed a theory in Makot 13b that all those liable to karet are also liable to malkot. And if they repent, then they will be given.
Then they will be forgiven.
Forgiven.
Now, there's a machloket between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva in Makot Daf Yud Gimel. But Rabbi Akiva's view, and I will read, Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayvei Kretot Yeshno Bichlal Malkot. Anybody who's liable karet can also be given a lashing. ואין כאן משום חייבי שתי
רשעיות.
רשעיות. ואין כאן משום שתי רשעיות, שאתה עונשו מלקות עם karet. Now we have a principle. It says, okay, כדי רשעתו במספר. We have a pasuk that you only give one penalty for one sin.
It's called double jeopardy.
Well, okay, fine. Similar to double jeopardy, absolutely. Can only punish you once. So for one sin, you get one punishment. If you get karet, then you can't get malkot. But Rabbi Akiva said, he argued with Rabbi Ishmael. He says, yes, you can. Why? V'lama einan shtei rishawiyot. Why are there not two sins here to justify two punishments? Namely, we have karet and malkot. How can you do that? So here we have an important principle that fits Rabbi Akiva's worldview. If you repent and you suffer malkot, then you can expect forgiveness by the divine court. Now, Rabbi Ishmael says, I don't understand what goes on in the divine court. Just a second, Jean. And I say that you cannot have karet and malkot.
Kim lebi the Rabbi Minei.
Kam lebi the Rabbi Minei is only in the case of a kal vachomer. If you learn a din by a kal vachomer, you cannot get a stricter result. Therefore, it says, Va'avia yarok b'fanea halot tikalem for 2 weeks, but because it's a kal vachomer, okay, if a Moshe against God, we say only 1 week. Kam lebi the Rabbi Minei applies to a din on the basis of a kal vachomer. These are dinim which are written in the Torah with their penalties. So we have to say kedei rishato. One resha equals one punishment. Rabbi Akiva says no. In the case of karet, I can give you malkot because it's not a punishment. It is a reward. You can get rid of your karet if you get malkot. Okay? And this is why the malkot is not considered to be a second punishment in relation to karet. Very interesting idea. And it is accommodated in the Rambam's view. We'll move on to page 2. Afal pi shatruva mechaperet. Jean, would you read, please? Line 1. Afal
pi shatruva mechaperet al hakol, ועצמו של יום הכיפורים מכפר, יש עבירות שהן מתכפרין, מתכפרות בשעתן, ויש עבירות שאין מתכפרין אלא לאחר זמן.
Now we have a scheme. You sin, you've got a possibility of tshuva. There is personal tshuva when you repent within yourself. Then there's Yom Kippur. But the tshuva and the kapara, sometimes they happen immediately, and sometimes they take time. So let's read the list, okay? What
עבר אדם על מצוות עשה, שאין בה כרת.
Okay, we have a mitzvah say there's no karet. For example, which mitzvah say do we have for which the penalty is karet?
Brit Milah.
Brit Milah, thank you.
It's Shabtotai Tishmoru.
Okay,
Right.
That's a loisase.
What?
No.
Brit Milah. Brit Milah is a mitzvah say for which the penalty is karet. Now, many mitzvot say, hardly any of them, none of them in fact, except for Korban Pesach and Brit Milah, no mitzvot say, no, have a penalty of karet. So the easy case, you didn't build a sukkah on Pesach. You didn't bring...
You don't need to build a sukkah on Pesach.
Sorry. You didn't build a sukkah on Sukkot, okay? I can go to a whole list of things you didn't do. You didn't daven shacharis, okay? Didn't put on your tefillin. What happens then? There's no karet. Va'asa tshuva, Jean, and you did tshuva. Line 3.
Oui, mais על מצוות עשה שאין בה כרת, ועשה תשובה, אינו זז משם עד שמוכלים לו מיד. ובאילו נאמר, שובו בנים שובבים, ארפה משובותיכם.
So Rambam always has a nice pasuk. He says, okay, just do tshuva and I will heal you of your backsliding. No problem. Al amakom, there and then you will get forgiveness and atonement. What's the next case?
עבר על מצוות לא תעשה, שאין בה כרת, ועשה תשובה, תשובה תולה, ויום הכיפורים מכפר.
Now, if you did do something that you shouldn't have done, the mitzvah lo taseh, okay, you charged interest, you stole, okay, there's no karet, you did shuvah, you have to wait for Yom Kippur.
Excuse me, what happens if you really want to do tshuva, you receive the malchus as prescribed, but on the next day, conditions have not changed, and you're obligated to commit the same transgressions again? You have no choice.
If you have no choice, then you have no choice. Now, the point is that for these sins, okay, you can rely upon Yom Kippur. So you have to hang around until Yom Kippur, okay? You're not going to get Malkot, I assume, because there's nobody to give you Malkot. But you wait for Yom Kippur. By the way, on Yom Kippur, Jack, you may know this, there's a custom to get Malchus. You know that, right?
49.
You can go. You know, I saw this as a boy. You know, the shamus would have a very delicate and not a very tough whip. And after going to the mikveh on Yom Kippur morning, he would be there and you can ask him to give you Malchus. Okay? That, I don't think it happens anymore, although, again, of course, probably does in Geula or in Bnei Barak or in Slobodka, okay? But
normally.
Ranon, do you know of any places where you can go and get your Malchus on Erev Yom Kippur?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, all right. Thank you, Shmuley. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that can be done, and we're relying upon Yom Kippur. This is the important sentence here. Okay. Thank you, Jean. Ranon, would you give us the next one on line 5? Avar al kretot.
עבר על כרתות ועשה תשובה, התשובה ביום הכיפורים תולים, וייסורים הבאים עליו גומרים לו הכפרה.
Now, this means that Tshuva and Yom Kippur, they are hanging there. They haven't brought you atonement. But suffering is going to complete your kapara. Now, what does it mean by suffering? Rambam helps us. Ula'olam.
ולעולם אין מכפר לכפרה גמורה עד שיבואו עליו ייסורים. ובאלו נאמר, ופקדתי בשבט פשעם ובנגעים עוונם.
So, there's a pasuk in Tehillim, and I will visit your transgressions, okay, with a rod, a shevet, and negaim avonam. The negaim are basically strokes, lashes. We know that from a parallel pasuk in the book of Shmuel. God speaks to David about Shlomo, and he says, "V'hochachti b'shevet anashim uvenig'ei b'nei adam," and there it means corporal punishment. Rambam is hinting that the Yisurin, the suffering, which will help you get over karet, sins, is malkot, is being lashed 39 times. So, clearly, Yitz, Bound Freund, would you give us the next one, please? Clearly.
Clearly, one form of physical suffering, Yisurin, is the administration of Malkot. The scholarly Iberian refugees now began to develop an intense interest in Malkot as a means of getting absolution for their sins involving the karet punishment.
Now you see where we are going with this. If we can get Malchus, then we can get out of our, because we all are doing tshuva. Okay? But we've got these sins, they have been committed. And that combination of, if you like, the deep guilty conscience, and also, as Ranon said, the fact that they came from a culture that required suffering for expiation, for forgiveness of sin, has driven them to take an intense interest in real, genuine Malchus. 11. Line 11, please. The problem, however, Yitz, give us another couple of lines, please.
The problem, however, was that genuine Malkot is not simply a beating. It is a court-administered penalty requiring an official Beit Din of Musmachim.
Now we reveal the plot. In order to get valid Malkot, you need an official Beit Din, but not any old Beit Din. Not a Beit Din of contemporary rabbis with Heter Hora. You need genuine, authentic, real McCoy Musmachim who have proper smicha. And this is why they were interested in renewing smicha. Read on, please. The Talmud Sanhedrin 10a rules.
The Talmud Sanhedrin 10a rules that Malkot are given by a Beit Din of 3 on the basis of the verse, V'hayim bin hakot harasha v'ikau kedei rishato b'mispar.
V'nigshu al hashofet.
Oh, v'nigshu al hashoftim v'shvatum v'hayim bin hakot harasha.
The Malkot is given by the shofet, and the shofet is a shofet in the Tanakh who presumably has smicha. Moshe Rabbeinu, as we'll read shortly, gave smicha to Yoshua. Yoshua gave it to the Zkenim, and it went on until when we will see. Now the Beit Din in question.
Now the Beit Din in question must consist of 3 judges. Possibly only one is necessary, and he appoints 2 others.
That's another issue, as we'll see. But all of these judges who received original
smicha, namely ordination by someone whose ordination goes back in an unbroken chain of ordinations to Moshe Rabbeinu's smicha of Yoshua.
So here the plot begins to thicken, but we understand what is happening here. Yael, are you around? No?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please start from line 19, and then I'll get you to read the Rambam in Hebrew. Maimonides
describes the process and status of the original smicha as follows. Rambam Hilchot Sanhedrin, Perek Daled. אחד בית דין הגדול ואחד סנהדרין קטנה, או בית דין של 3, צריך שיהיה כל אחד מהן סמוך מפי הסמוך.
Okay, so what is the beit din hagadol in the Rambam's terminology? I want a word beginning with samach and ending in nun. Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 members. What sort of things did the Sanhedrin do when it existed? It appointed
declared the month.
No, that you could do with the Beit Din of 3. You appointed a king. You could
declare the month.
No. 3. You could kill a Zaken Mamre. You could kill the Irani Dachat people. You could declare a war. You could expand the courtyards of the temple. You could
extend the limits of Jerusalem.
Exactly. That's what I just said. Okay, the temple and the ear, Azarot and the ear, a lot of stuff that you say, this is national stuff. Now, what is the Sanhedrin Ktana? How many members are there?
31.
23.
21.
23. Thank you, Jean. Comme toujours. How many members are there in a New York grand jury? Anybody know?
23.
Wow, Shmuley, amazing. Okay. The New York grand jury is 23, and it is exactly like that to commemorate the small Sanhedrin, which dealt with capital matters. Capital matters are dealt with by the small Sanhedrin of 23. The Beit Din Shel Shlosha deals with all sorts of things.
Dine Mamonot.
Deals with Knasot, actually, and Ibur Hashana. It intercalates the year, adds your Adar. It also imposes fines. You can have Hedyotot for Hatarat. Nedarim, it imposes fines. We're talking about double payment for theft, payment of 4 and 5 times if you stole a sheep or an ox. We're talking about ones, mefateh, kefel, and gzelot and chabalot, laws of torts and damages. So, Yael, please, after we talked about the 3 types of courts, Tzarich Shihiyeh, line 22.
ומשה רבינו שמח יהושע ביד, שנאמר, ויסמוך את ידיו עליו ויצווהו. וכן, 70 זקנים, משה רבינו שמחם ושרתה עליהן שכינה, ואותן הזקנים שמחו לאחרים, ואחרים לאחרים, ונמצאו הסמוכים איש מפי איש, עד בית דינו של יהושע ועד בית דינו של משה רבינו.
So authentic smicha goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and it goes right through the Rambam, actually, in his Akdama Mishnah, gives us a chain of people, one of whom appointed the other and ordained and ordained. וכיצד
היא הסמיכה לדורות? לא שיסמכו ידיהן על ראש הזקן, אלא שקוראים לו רבי, ואומרים לו, הרי את סמוך או סמוך?
סמוך.
סמוך. ויש לך רשות לדון אפילו דיני כנסות. אין קרוי אלוהים, אלא בית דין שנסמך בארץ ישראל בלבד, והם האנשים החכמים הראויים לדון, שבדקו אותן בית דין של ארץ ישראל, ומינו אותם וסמכו אותן.
So, smicha is only given in Eretz Israel. The word Elohim, by the way, does not only mean God. It means anybody who has authority. Can you give me a pasuk in the book of Shmot, actually in Parashat Shmot?
Asher Yarshiun Elokim.
I said in Parashat Shmot. Yarshiun Elohim, okay, but I want something that really tells you that it's not God.
Elohim lo tekalel.
Why? Again, it could be you shall not curse God. What did God say to Moshe? Re'ei nataticha?
Elohim le paro.
So definitely Moshe is not God. And God says to him, I've made you an Elohim with respect to Pharaoh. And what does the Targum say? Minitei Rav la paro. So any master, anybody in authority is called Elohim. And the judges are referred to as Elohim in many passages in the Tanakh. So how does the Rambam formulate this? Yael, you can give us the Rambam in Hilchot Sanhedrin, please. Makot.
Makot bishlosha.
Very important. How many smuchim do you need to give Malkot?
3.
Ibur Hashana.
שנה בשבעה. וכל אלה סמוכים כמו שבארנו. דיני כנסות כגון גזלות וחבלות ותשלומי כפל ותשלומי 4 ו5 והאונס והמפתה וכיוצא בהן, אין דנים אותם אלא 3 מומחים, והם הסמוכים בארץ ישראל.
So מומחים סמוכים in ארץ ישראל. אבל
שאר דיני ממונות כגון הודאות והלוואות אינן צריכים מומחה, אלא אפילו 3 הדיוטות.
Regular financial disputes don't need a bet din of smuchim. But anything else, like fines or intercalating the year or a whole lot of other stuff, requires a bet din of smuchim. Okay? אלא אפילו 3 הדיוטות,
ואפילו אחד מומחה דן אותן, לפיכך דנים בהודאות והלוואות וכיוצא בהן בחוץ לארץ.
You can have a din Torah in Chutz La'aretz, but you cannot impose any of the fines, like the double payment for theft, payment of 4 or 5 for an ox or a sheep, honest, rape, mefateh, seduction, chabalot, torts, if you've caused personal harm. All of these things require a level of discretion, how much you impose as a fine, as opposed to a regular dispute. I claim you owe me $5,000. You say I only owe you $2,500. Well, any bet din that we agree upon can settle that. You don't need this original smicha that went from Moshe Rabbeinu. The problem, however, was, thank you, Yael, Marcel, it's your turn. Line 37, please. The problem now...
The problem was now that the uninterrupted chain of smicha had been finally and indefinitely definitively broken around 316, the Common Era, when Hillel II fixed the Jewish calendar mathematically.
Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvot, Mitzvot Tasei Kuf Nun Gimel, V'lachen Batla HaRi'iyah. Now this is also something. If we have smicha, we can go back to working out the Jewish calendar by looking at the moon, which would be interesting. So the Rambam says that we don't work out the calendar by using the moon anymore. Beheder bedina gadol. We don't have the Sanhedrin and all the other Musmachim courts. Just like we can't offer sacrifices because we don't have a Bet HaMikdash. The Ramban agrees, והדבר גלוי הוא, שהיום מכמה שנים ביטלו סמוכין מארץ ישראל. There are no people with authentic smicha in the land of Israel. אין דנים שם אפילו דיני קנסות. וכל שכן שיקדשו על פי הראייה. By the way, what would the corollary be? If we did have smuchin back in Eretz Israel, would we be required to abolish our mathematical calendar and go back to looking up and going back to moon gazing?
No.
No? Well, why not?
It's a big big problem, but according to Rambam, Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, I think Perek He Mishnah Bet, when there is, donc זה תלוי בזה, אם יש סמוכים צריכים לקדש על פי ראייה, ואם אין,
Did you hear that? צריכים לקדש על פי ראייה. Now,
but could you go back to what you said last week about if it's nahug in the kahal, it's become a minhag, that we've got it?
No, minhagim do not override solid halakha, certainly not in religious matters, only in monetary matters, okay? Now, the Khatam Sofer was talking about a minhag in takanot hakahal, to ignore Rabbeinu Tam in his insistence on majority rule, and the use of minhag to justify following the representative minority. But when it comes to a clear rabbinical directive to intercalate the year by adding a month, if it's tzrichim, we may have a problem here, okay? Because Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvot and Ramban both are talking about a situation where we have no smicha. On the other hand, we do have the advantage of getting official malkot. So those of you who are really interested, and Jean, by the way, has a strong interest in astronomy and the Jewish calendar, so you can ask him, by the way, okay? He is a real expert in this field, and but I've given you a little bibliography in case you want to chase this up. Rabbi Avraham Bar Chia wrote Sefer HaIbur, the book of intercalating the year, okay? And the Tashbetz, who we talked about, Shimon ben Semach Duran, he wrote Zohar Harakia. Jean, do you know that book?
No.
Ah, well, you should. It's an amazing book. Tashbetz was fantastic. He was a polymath. In addition to his halakha, he was a mathematician and an astronomer and a doctor. It's a fascinating book about Kiddush HaChodesh and astronomy. The Sefer HaTrumot by Rabbi Baruch Misardi, Maurei Naim by Azaria Di Rossi also talks about. Could we have everybody muted, please? Rabbi Chaim Yechiel Bornstein published in 1919 in Warsaw, a whole book about Mishpat HaSmicha v'Koroteh. Now, so we're getting, again, closer each time to the point here. So let's go back. Jack, you're at the top of the list. Would you start us off, please? Line 15, 16th century Safed.
10?
Do you?
In the 16th century, it's about the powerhouse of Jewish learning and the largest Jewish community in Ottoman southern Syria. In 1525, there were 232 Jewish families. By 1553, the number had risen to 716.
Now that is a lot for a Jewish community at this time anywhere. Okay? These are families, all right? The question with which
the cream of refugee Iberian rabbinic scholarship began to examine in Svat in the 16th century was whether or not it was possible to reintroduce original smicha and thereby provide a halakhic means of penance for all those Bal Tshuva, many of whom were now rabbis and teachers of Torah who craved a means of absolution for their past transgression. But simply, is it possible to renew smicha?
Okay, I got a comment from my left about they're not really rabbis. Correct. We talked about this from the Middle Ages onwards, well, from late Middle Ages, there's something called heter hora'ah, and rabbinical teachers would give their talmidim what we also call smichat rabbeinu. Okay, we read about them. We talked about the chief rabbi conflict between the Rivash and the Tashbetz. These are not original smichot by any means. But what we want is to know, put simply. Jack, would you give us the bold line?
The central text in this halakha.
Okay, no, put simply, is it possible
to renew smicha?
To renew smicha. That's the question. Can we renew smicha? But the reasons for it was driven by the desire to get proper malkot so that penance could be done for all the serious sins that had been committed in the times of dreadful and awful persecution. So there are two texts in the Rambam, so I will read. A smichat zkenim, this is in the Perush La Mishnah. The next text will be in the Mishneh Torah. What came first? Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah or his
Yad HaChazaka.
Mishneh Torah Yad HaChazaka. Okay. The Mishneh Torah, the Perush La Mishnah was finished in 1167.
When he was 30.
Correct. And then the Sefer, the Mishneh Torah was published, I think in 1188. And finally, the Moreh Nevuchim was his last book. He died in 1204. Okay, 1204, exactly. So the Perush HaMishnah comes first. And let's hear what he has to say. It's very interesting. Smichat zkenim hu minui hadayanim הרמז לכך אמרו ויסמוך את ידיו עליו ויצווהו. ואין צריכים סמיכה ביד, אלא האדם הראוי להתמנות, אומרים לו בדין הממנים אותו, אתה רבי פלוני הרי אתה סמוך ומותר לך לדון דיני קנסות. This comes together, smicha and dinei knesot. Okay? So Rambam describes what we learned in the Gemara. Then he goes on. ונעשה אותו אדם סמוך ונקרא אלוהים, וידון בכל הדינים, ודבר זה לא יהיה אלא בארץ ישראל בלבד. This can only be done in the land of Israel. אמרו אין סמיכה בחוץ לארץ, not in the diaspora, אלא צריך שיהיה המתמנה והממנים אותו בארץ ישראל יחד. Everybody has to be in the land of Israel. וכשתהיה לאדם סמיכה בארץ ישראל, יש לו לדון דיני קנסות ואפילו בחוץ לארץ. But once you have it, you can leave Israel and you can have this extra capacity to judge all of the matters of fines and levies. לפי שכלל אצלנו סנהדרין נוהגת בארץ ובחוץ לארץ. כמו שנאמר נתבע לקמן, יהיה מכות. אבל אם צריך שיהיו שלושה סמוכים ואחר כך יהיה אפשר להם לסמוך אחר, הרי יש בדבר ספק, ונראה מן התלמוד שצריך שיהיה הגדול שבהם סמוך. Now, let's say you only have one samuch left. Can he do these things that require a bet din of 3? The answer is yes. Yitzaref elav shnayim v'yamane et mi she
ירצה.
ani savur Now we get to the interesting bit. שאם תהיה הסכמה מכל התלמידים החכמים למנות איש בישיבה, if we have everybody agreeing to make a Rosh Yeshiva, כלומר שיעשו ראש, בתנאי שיהיה זה בארץ ישראל כמו שהקדמנו, has to be in the land of Israel, it says מכל התלמידים והחכמים, הרי אותו האיש תתקיים לו הישיבה, ויהיה סמוך ויסמוכו אחר כך את מי שירצה. That man who's appointed Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Israel by agreement of all of the sages in Eretz Israel, well, he can then give smicha. He will have received smicha, and now he can pass it on. לפי שהם לא תאמר כן, לא תהיה אפשרית מציאות בתי דין הגדול לעולם. If you don't say that, we'll never be able to get a Sanhedrin. לפי שצריך כל אחד מהם שיהיה סמוך. בלי ספק. הרי כבר הבטיח השם בשיבתם באומרו, והשיבה שופטייך כבראשונה. Now, in Isaiah chapter 1, we know that God says, I'm going to return your judges as they once were. Rambam is very creative with psukim. So he says there must be a time in the future when we will get back our smuchim. Now you might say, well, we have to wait for Mashiach to come. But no, that's not true. ספרנו זה, שהמשיח לא יוסיף בתורה ולא יגרע ממנה, לא בתורה שבכתב ולא בתורה שבעל פה. The job of the Mashiach is not to be halachically creative, but to bring peace. ואני סבור שהסנהדרין תשוב לפני התגלות המשיח. We have to have a Sanhedrin before Mashiach comes. וזה יהיה מסימניו, and this will be a sign that we're in the Messianic era. Amar v'ashiva shoftaif kevarishona. What did Isaiah say? I'll return your judges as they were in the beginning. V'yoatzaich kevatechila, and your counselors as they once were. V'achrechen yikrei lecha ir hatzedek, and after that you'll be the city of righteousness. וזה בלי ספק כאשר יכשיר השם ליבות בני אדם וירבו במעשה הטוב, ותגדל תשוקתם להשם ולתורתו ויתרבה יושרם לפני בוא המשיח. In his Perush LaMishnah, the Rambam apparently says that if we have all of the Gedolim in Eretz Israel agreeing, we can appoint one Rosh Yeshiva who will be called a Masmich, and he can then give smicha to others, and we will have a Bet Din, and that Bet Din could give official Malkot. Now that's a grand idea, but in his Mishneh Torah, he apparently steps a little back, and I'm going to read this because we're almost out of time. And I want to do the next Gemara as well. This is the Rambam, his later work in his Code of Jewish Law, the Mishneh Torah, alias Yad HaChazaka. You have in the land of Israel one musmach. Moshiv shnayim b'tzido v'somech shivim ke'echad, o ze achar ze. He can appoint any amount of smuchim, and he can appoint 70. And then we could make a Sanhedrin. 70 plus him, because every court has to be odd and not even, 71. And then we can make the Batei Din of 23, and we can have Batei Din of 3, who could give Malkot. This is the Rambam again. I think that if all the Chachamim in the land of Israel agreed, we could reintroduce smicha. And the hallmark of a musmach is to be able to judge laws of fines. And then they can start off a new chain of smicha. אם כן, למה היו החכמים מצטערים על הסמיכה? כדי שלא יבטלו דיני קנסות בישראל. The Rambam says, so why were these sages upset that the smicha was going to end? And that's the Gemara we're going to read about Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. The answer is, לפי שישראל מפוזרים. Because Israel is scattered, We cannot get them together in one place to agree on the smicha. If we have one musmach, then ela dan dine knasot lakol shari nismach mipi bet din. One musmach is sufficient. Vadavar tzarich hechreya. Now, of course, this is a $64,000 question. Rambam says at the end of the matter needs to be resolved. So we have a doubt. To what does this refer? Does it refer to the last line of Fishi Yisrael Mufuz V'Imayasham Samuch Mipi Samuch Einot Tzarich Da'at Kulam? You don't need all of the opinions if you have an original musmach there. Okay, is that what the Hadavar Tzarich Hechreya means, or is the whole theory something which has not yet been resolved? Now, notice, Rambam in Perush HaMishnah is very clear. He says there's no problem. We get all the sages of Israel together in one place and we reintroduce smicha. He seems to be more hesitant when it comes to the Mishnah Torah because he says Hadavar Tzarich Hechreya. But Hadavar Tzarich Hechreya could be either on the new din he introduced about one musmach being enough to give smicha without getting everybody else together, or is it the whole idea of reintroducing smicha by appointing one Rosh Yeshiva as a musmach, and then he in turn will be able to give smicha to others, and that will be an authentic smicha? Now that, of course, as I said, is a $64,000 question, which, as you can appreciate, is what we're going to have to talk about. Now the line which we need to read is about smicha in the Gemara. It's a famous Gemara in Sanhedrin. Zachor oto ish tov. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava shmo. Remember that man well, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Shilmalehu nishlachu dinei kenasot Israel. Now Yehuda ben Bava lived at the time of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was put to death. Yehuda ben Bava is left. He had smicha from a previous generation of Tanaim. He's the one musmach left in the entire land of Israel. The Romans knew what to attack, and they said, whoever gives smicha will be put to death, hoping to break Jewish spirit by depriving us of musmachim. The Ir says somchimba, and if anybody gives smicha in any city, techare, the city will be destroyed. And all the people living within the Tchum Shabbat, 2,000 cubits of the city, will be uprooted and exiled. Ma asa Yehuda ben Bava, halach v'yashav lo ben shnei harim gdolim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava went and sat between two high mountains. Mountainous terrain, not easy to discover him. Uven shtei ayarot gedolot, and between two large cities, so that no one city should be implicated in the smicha. Uven shnei tchumei Shabbat, and the same reason, so that no one city should have its population removed. Ben Usha lishvaram, and it was between Usha and Shvaram, and we visit these places today. We know where they are. They were famous centers of activities of the Tanaim in the Galil. The Samach Sham Chamisha Zkenim. Zkenim were not necessarily old, they were wise. In fact, they were young. They were the remaining Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had just been put to death by the Romans. He had 5 Talmidim, young Talmidim, who survived. Ve'elohen, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Ben Ilai, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Avia Mosif, Rabbi Nechemia. Kevan shekiru oivehem bahen, the Romans were patrolling and they were tipped off, or they found out what was happening. Amalahen banai rutsu. He gave them smicha. He was a samuch, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. He said, run. Amru lo, Rebbe mate alecha. So they said, well, what's going to happen to you? You've given us smicha, and we are running, but you're staying here. Amalahen hareini mutal lifnehem ke'eben she'en la hofchim. I am going to be like a stone that is not moved. That's one way. The Maharsha says, like a stone that doesn't feel pain. As it were, coining a modern poet, a rock does not feel pain. okay? And an island does not cry. Okay, so those who know. I see you're smiling, it's okay? So there we are. So Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm giving up my life so that they will be musmachim. And that's what the Rambam meant when he said, why were we so mitztarim, we're so distressed when the prospect of smicha coming to an end was real in the time of Roman persecution. Yehuda ben Bava, okay? Amru, lo zazu misham ad shena'atzu bo 300 lun viyot. The Romans threw 300 darts, metal darts into Yehuda ben Bava's body. Basuhu kikvara, and he was like a sieve. Okay? The holes and the blood, I leave you with a picture. But what we're talking about here is the fact that there's one samuch in Eretz Israel, he can give smicha and pass it on. What the Rambam says is that the problem, why was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava required to give up his life? Because there was no possibility of renewing smicha, because the Romans made sure that the rabbis never got together. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son ran away to a cave. So when you suppress rabbinic life, you cannot get smicha going. But the Rambam is saying that if it's a period when you can get the rabbis together, and you get the best and the cream of them, and they appoint one Rosh Hashiva, he can start a new chain of smicha. And now you can see why there was a smicha enterprise in Tzfat in 1538. We want to be able to reintroduce smicha, to set up a bet din, to be able to administer malkot, and also to be able to introduce some modicum of unity in Jewish practice. But the main driving force historically is the desire to do penance for sins which require karet. And we're going to go into this in terms of the two protagonists, Rabbi Yaakov Be'erav and the Maharal Abach, Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv. We're going to have a look at what happened. Was smicha reintroduced? What are the major halachic disputes and what happened? And a couple of other things. But we have set the scene. So I'm going to finish the screen. Okay, stop share. And are there any questions or comments? Jean.
Alors, finally, why is it Vadavar Tzarich Echea? If the Echea is about the possibility to create Smira from scratch, Rambam said that if we don't accept it, it will never come back. And if the argument is that maybe one cannot, we see that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava could. Donc I don't know why he suddenly write Davar Tzarich Echea.
That is, of course, the main question. Was he going back and saying that what I wrote in the Perush HaMishnah is too confident, too strong, and I'm actually backtracking, אני מתחרט על זה, לפחות אני אומר שצריכים לשבת, okay? Because in Perush HaMishnah, he's very, very definitive. In the Mishneh Torah, he says, Vadavar tzarich echreya. Now, if he's only talking about Yehuda ben Bava, okay, then I can understand that perhaps because there is a view in the Gemara that one musmach alone cannot reintroduce smicha, cannot give smicha. There have to be three. But if we're talking about that, then the Rambam might say, I don't know. But his first thesis about one Rosh Hashiva reintroducing smicha and giving smicha to many, perhaps he's still clear about that. On the other hand, perhaps he's saying that is a question I'm now not prepared to be as certain and sure as I was. Next week, we'll try to at least open this up and see how it went and whether the elusive issue of Jewish unity can ever be achieved in halakhic terms. So
to support what you just said, the Rambam's language in the second line of that passage, bet is nirim li hadvarim. This he only says when he's not certain, and that's why
also possible.
That's the reference which davar hatzarich echreya.
No, Rambam says when it is not explicitly in the Talmud, I say, there in the Mishnah, he wrote also Savurani.
Okay, so let's put that on the shelf, and we'll talk about that next week. What did the Rambam mean? That's very interesting. Okay, so again, we follow a long tradition of hanging on the words of the Rambam and trying to figure out exactly what he meant. Jack, what would you like to say?
Wouldn't it be theoretically possible for one Masmor to appoint 70 other ones and thus pack a Sanhedrin to his own needs or his own opinions?
According to the optimistic view of the Rambam, yes, you could reintroduce smicha, and that one. But according to the view of the Rabbi Levi ben Chavid, the Rambam did not mean that. So what the Rambam meant exactly, something that we have to consider and think about. And I need, of course, to stop the recording. I think I remember how to do that. Are you sure you want to stop recording to the cloud? Yes.